We are not just wading into the shallow end. Oh, no.
No, not at all.
We are going straight to the bottom of the deepest trench in the entire ocean of legal history.
That's a good way to put it. We're talking about, well, arguably the case that defines modern India.
Absolutely. It's the most significant, the most complex, and I think the most dramatic legal battle in the history of constitutional democracy. If you are listening to this and you live in a democracy, or you simply care about how a society balances the raw will of the majority with the fragile rights of the individual, you have to understand this story.
It is the Everest of constitutional law. It's the case that asked a question so fundamental, so frankly terrifying, that the answer would determine whether a nation remained a democracy or just slid into authoritarianism.
Right. We're talking, of course, about Kesavananda versus the state of Kerala from 1973. And when I say huge, I mean it is literally huge.
Oh, the physical size alone is daunting.
We're looking at a judgment that runs over 700 pages in the law reports.
And a bench of 13 judges.
13. The largest ever assembled in the history of the Indian Supreme Court. They sat and listened to arguments for 68 days. I mean, it's a legal blockbuster in every sense of the word.
It is, but the size isn't really the point, is it? It's the stakes.
The stakes were everything.
This wasn't just a dispute about land, though it did start that way. It was a battle for the soul of the Indian Constitution, a battle over who is truly supreme. Parliament, speaking for the people today, or the Constitution, speaking for the values of the nation across time.
Exactly. And that's where I want to start, because the central tension here is something I think every listener can relate to, even without a legal background. It's this battle between what you could call the dead hand of the past and the will of the living.
A classic conflict.
I mean, think about it. You have this brilliant document, sure, written in 1949, but by 1973, the country has changed dramatically. There's immense poverty, inequality. There's this desperate, burning need for economic reform.
And so your argument from that perspective would be?
My argument, or at least the argument of what we'll call the evolutionary side, is that a constitution has to breathe. It has to adapt. If the parliament, which represents the living, breathing people, wants to change the rules to feed the poor or redistribute land, the Constitution shouldn't be a shackle.
It shouldn't get in the way of progress.
It shouldn't be a suicide pact that stops progress just because some people in the 1940s wrote something down. Why should the ghost of a framer stop a modern legislature from solving today's problems?
That is a very compelling narrative. It's the narrative of progress, of flexibility. It appeals to our sense of urgency. But let me counter that with the structuralist view, which was the absolute heartbeat of the Kesavananda decision.
Go on.
Think about the concept of identity.
Identity.
Yes. Think of a human body. Over 7 years, almost every cell in your body is replaced. You change biologically, you evolve. But you're still you.
Right.
There's an essence, a core structure that makes you who you are. If I replace your heart with a pump, you might survive. But if I replace your brain with a computer or wipe your memories, are you still you?
Okay, that got dark quickly, but I see your point. It's the ship of Theseus paradox.
Precisely. The structuralist argument is that a constitution isn't just a rule book you can rewrite whenever the political wind changes. It has an identity, a structure. And while you can renovate the house, paint the walls, change the windows, you cannot knock out the pillars holding up the roof.
Because then it's not a renovation, it's a demolition.
Exactly. If you alter the core character, you don't amend the Constitution. You destroy it. You abrogate it.
And that is the cliffhanger. We are going to unpack this massive judgment to answer one single terrifying question. Does Parliament have the power to destroy the Constitution in the name of amending it?
To do this, we're relying on the original text of the Kesavananda judgment, that's Writ Petition 135 of 1970, along with analyses of the preamble, the heated arguments, and, later interpretations like the S.R. Bommai case.
So let's get into the hook. The sources mentioned this suicide question. It sounds so dramatic, but it was a real legal argument made in court.
It was the central hypothetical. The petitioners, representing that structuralist view, asked a very simple question.
Which was?
If Parliament's power is truly unlimited, as the government claimed, could they use the amending power to just vote democracy out of existence?
Wow.
Could they establish a monarchy, abolish the Supreme Court?
Imagine that. A parliament elected by the people using its power to say, okay, thanks for the votes, but no more elections. We're kings now.
It sounds absurd, right? But legally, if you believe the Constitution is fully flexible and that Article 368, the Amendment Clause, has no limits. There's nothing stopping that.
Unless
There is an invisible line it cannot cross.
let's find that line. But first, we have to understand the mess they were in. This is part one. The context. Pendulums, property, and the political climate.
And a holy man in Kerala.
Right. His Holiness Kesavananda Faradi. He was the head of a religious monastery in Kerala. And you don't usually think of a monk at the center of a huge constitutional battle.
You don't. But this monk had a significant amount of land, and that's the crux of it. The Kerala state government passed the Land Reforms Act. They were trying to impose restrictions on the mutt's property and redistribute that land.
And this wasn't just happening in Kerala. This was part of a huge wave of agrarian reform across India. The government was trying to implement what we call the directive principles of state policy.
Which are in Part 4 of the Constitution. They're basically instructions to the state.
Right. They say things like distribute wealth, prevent the concentration of resources, ensure social justice, the big socioeconomic goals.
All of which sounds great. I mean, who's against social justice?
Exactly. The problem was, to do it, to take land from the wealthy and give it to tenant farmers, the government had to collide head-on with Part 3 of the Constitution.
Fundamental rights. Specifically, the right to property. So you have this incredible friction. The Constitution has two consciences. Part 3 says, here are your individual rights, and the state can't touch them.
And Part 4 says, here are our social goals, and the state must achieve them. So what happens when achieving the social goal requires violating the individual right?
It's the irresistible force meeting the immovable object. And for 20 years, the Supreme Court had been just flip-flopping on this. It was a judicial pendulum.
It started way back in 1951. A case called Sankari Prasad. The ink on the Constitution was barely dry.
And what did the court say then?
They basically said, Parliament is supreme.
Mm-hmm.
The power to amend the Constitution is a special constituent power, different from making ordinary laws. So yes, Parliament can amend anything, even fundamental rights.
So in 51, the door was wide open for the government.
Wide open. They distinguished between constituent power, the power to remake the system, and legislative power, just making rules within the system. Parliament, they said, had the first one. But then, the pendulum swung hard. In 1967, we get the Golak Nath case. And this was a bombshell.
Golak Nath was a radical departure. The court, led by Chief Justice Subba Rao, saw the government amending the Constitution over and over to get around court rulings, and they said stop.
And what was their ruling?
They ruled that fundamental rights are transcendental and immutable, sacred. Parliament cannot touch them at all.
So they locked the Constitution in a glass case. This is perfect, don't touch it. They completely overruled Sankari Prasad.
And that created a constitutional crisis. Because now the government was stuck. They had a mandate to fix the land system, to end feudalism, but the court had completely tied their hands.
They couldn't implement their social agenda.
Yeah.
Every time they touched property rights, the court would just cite Golak Nath.
So Parliament did what politicians do. They changed the rules of the game. They passed the 24th Amendment.
This is critical context for Kesavananda.
Absolutely. The 24th Amendment was Parliament's direct, angry response to Golak Nath. It explicitly stated, yes, we have the power to amend any part of this Constitution, including fundamental rights.
They even changed the wording of Article 368.
They did. They inserted the words constituent power right into the text to legally bypass the court's old logic. They wanted to make it crystal clear that there were no limits on their power.
Talk about a power struggle. You have the Supreme Court saying, you can't touch these rights, and Parliament replying, watch us. We just amended the Constitution to say we can.
And that sets the stage for the showdown in Kesavananda Karate. The monk, Kesavananda, challenged the land reforms. But to win, he had to challenge the 24th Amendment itself. The court had to finally decide, was Golak Nath right? Or is Parliament truly supreme?
This brings us to one of the most fascinating battlegrounds in the whole case, the preamble. Now, usually when I read a book, I might skip the introduction. I figure the real story starts in Chapter 1.
And in law, that had often been the view. The preamble, that beautiful text starting with "We the People," was often seen as a poetic flourish, a decoration.
Decoration or compass? That's the real question, isn't it?
Precisely. The evolutionary view, the one supported by the government, relied heavily on an earlier judgment called Berubari from 1960.
And what did Berubari say?
In Berubari, the Supreme Court explicitly held that the preamble is not part of the Constitution.
Wait, they said it's not part of it, but it's printed right there on the first page of every copy.
They viewed it as a key to the mind of the makers, but not the law itself. Their argument was that you can't get any substantive power or, more importantly, any limitations from the preamble. It's just a nice speech, a mission statement without legal teeth.
But in Kesamananda, the structuralist side, they dug up some history that changed
They
everything.
did. They went back to the old Constituent Assembly debates, and they found a specific, undeniable historical fact.
Please was.
The preamble was voted on last.
Okay, why does the timing matter? Why is first or last important?
Because the motion moved by the President of the Assembly, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, was specifically, the preamble stands part of the Constitution. It wasn't just an intro added by a publisher after the fact. It was debated, voted upon, and adopted at the very end to make sure it perfectly matched the document it was introducing.
So, if it was voted on,
It's part of the statute.
it's law. It is legally binding.
Exactly. In Kesavananda, the court completely reversed Burbari. They ruled the preamble is an integral part of the Constitution. And once you establish that, well, the implications are just massive.
This is where it gets really interesting. Because if the preamble is part of the Constitution, and the preamble defines what India is, sovereign, democratic republic, justice, liberty, equality, then doesn't that set the boundaries for any changes?
It becomes the guiding star. This is the core of the basic structure argument. If the preamble defines the very identity of the nation, can Parliament use its amending power to violate the preamble?
Can you amend a democratic republic to become a totalitarian dictatorship?
If you did, you wouldn't be amending it. You'd be contradicting the very first page. You would be creating a whole new constitution, not amending the old one.
Right.
And we see this play out later. In the Esser Baumai case in 1994, the court looked back at the preamble and noted the word secularism, which had been added by then. They said because secularism is in the preamble, it's part of the basic structure. You can't remove it. It's part of the soul of the document.
So the preamble went from being a decoration to being the compass that tells us which features are unchangeable. That's a huge shift.
A seismic shift.
But the government still had a very strong textual argument. They just pointed to Article 368.
Right. And that's part 3 of our deep dive, decoding Article 368. This is the article that gives Parliament the power to amend. And the text itself, on the surface, seems pretty straightforward. It just says, amendment of this Constitution.
And the battle here was semantic, wasn't it? What does the word amendment actually mean?
It seems simple, but in constitutional law, words are weapons.
So if I'm arguing the evolutionary view, the government's view, I'm looking at the dictionary. Amendment is a wide word. It means change. It implies addition, variation, or repeal.
Go on. Make the case for unlimited power.
Well, the argument is that this power to amend is a constituent power. It's a sovereign power. It's the power of the original framers, just handed down to Parliament. And if the framers wanted to stop Parliament from touching fundamental rights, they would have said so explicitly.
Like they did in the U.S. Constitution regarding the Senate.
Exactly. The U.S. Constitution explicitly says no state can be deprived of its equal vote in the Senate without its consent. That is an express limitation. The Indian Constitution has no such clear line in Article 368. So the argument goes, no express limitation means no limitation at all. If the text doesn't say don't touch this, then we can touch it.
And there was a philosophical argument to back this up.
The chakra argument, the wheel.
Tell us about it.
Justice Dwighty, who was on the side of unlimited power, used this really beautiful imagery. He said the nation is like a chakra, a wheel. It must always move forward. What was a fundamental right yesterday might be an obstacle today. If you freeze the Constitution, you stop the wheel. You stop progress. You doom the nation to stagnation.
It is a powerful argument. It really is. It appeals to this idea that the living should not be ruled by the dead. But let me put on my structuralist hat.
Well,
The counter-argument relies on the very meaning of the word amend. It comes from the Latin emendare, which means to correct or to improve.
so you amend a document to make it better.
You amend it to correct a fault within the existing system. You do not amend a document to abrogate it. To abrogate means to repeal, to destroy. If I give you the power to amend a contract, can you just tear it up and write a completely new one with different parties and different terms?
No, probably not. That wouldn't be an amendment. That would be a new contract entirely.
And that was the structuralist argument. The great lawyer Nani Palkavala, who argued for the petitioners, called the government's position the jellyfish argument.
The jellyfish analogy, I love that.
The government was essentially arguing the Constitution is a jellyfish. It has no structure, it has no spine, it can be squeezed into any shape, it can be whatever Parliament wants it to be today.
And the petitioners?
The petitioners argued, no, the Constitution is a vertebrate. It has a spine, it has a structure, you can change the organs, you can amend the laws, but if you remove the spine, you kill the organism. You can't turn a vertebrate into a jellyfish and call it an amendment.
It's a brilliant image.
And this leads to a crucial legal distinction. It's a bit high level, but it's vital. The distinction between constituent power and amending power.
Unpack that for us.
Constituent power is the original power of the people. The people, in 1947 to 1949, created the Constitution. They are the creator.
Okay.
Parliament is created by the Constitution. Parliament is, therefore, the creature.
And the creature cannot destroy the creator.
Exactly. Parliament is a constituted body, not a constituent body. It exercises a power given to it by the Constitution. It cannot use that power to destroy the very source of its own authority. A stream cannot rise higher than its source.
That leads us directly into the fear that drove this entire case. Part 4, the fear of tyranny versus the will of the people. Because this wasn't just some abstract semantic debate. This was happening in a courtroom with real, terrifying political consequences.
This is where the legal theory hits the harsh reality of politics, the Pandora's box scenario.
Right. During the arguments, the government side, the respondents, they made what I think was a tactical error. Or maybe they were just being logically consistent.
They were being consistent. When the judges asked them, does your power to amend include the power to take away free speech, to take away freedom of religion, the right to life?
What did they say?
The government lawyers said yes.
Wow. They claimed they could abrogate all fundamental rights.
And the judges pushed them further. They asked, could you establish a one-party rule? Could you abolish this very Supreme Court?
And the government's answer was basically,
legally, yes. But trust us, we wouldn't do that. We are a democracy.
that trust us argument never goes over well in a court of law.
It did not sit well with the judges. Chief Justice Sikri was particularly disturbed by this. He wrote that the Constitution has a noble and grand vision, and it was not intended to be the plaything of a special majority.
Plaything of a special majority. That's a stinging phrase. It implies that just because you won an election and you have the numbers in the House, you don't get to treat the country's foundational document like a toy.
The structuralist view is that you have to build a system on the assumption that power can be abused, not on the hope of benevolence. If Article 368 is unlimited, Parliament could, in theory, vote to make India a monarchy. They could vote to suspend all future elections.
But hold on, let me jump back to the evolutionary side here. There's a big trap here, isn't there? The whole substantive due process trap.
Which is a fancy way of saying, and who are you, the judges, to decide?
Exactly. If we say there are these implied limitations on Parliament, who decides what those limits are?
The judges.
Unelected judges.
Right?
If the court starts deciding what the spirit of the Constitution is, aren't they just substituting their own political views for the views of the elected Parliament? It's dangerous. It leads to what the sources call icy uncertainty.
I see uncertainty. I love that phrase. It's so evocative.
It means that no one knows what the law is until a judge tells them. How do you define the core? Is it property? Is it speech? Is it the color of the national flag? If it's vague, it's not law. It just opens the door for judges to strike down any law they don't personally like.
That is, without a doubt, the strongest argument against the basic structure doctrine. It's vague. But the structuralist rebuttal is that we aren't talking about a spirit or a vibe. We are talking about structure.
What's the difference?
A spirit is subjective. A structure is objective. You can look at the text of the Constitution and you can see the separation of powers. You can see the federal system. The states have power. The center has power. You can see the Republican form of government.
So these aren't feelings, they're architectural features.
Exactly. The court isn't inventing them, it's identifying them. They're like architects looking at a blueprint and saying, this is a load-bearing wall, you can't touch this one.
So they're saying, we aren't guessing what the framers felt. We are looking at what they built.
Precisely. And that brings us to the verdict. Part 5. The birth of basic structure.
April 24th, 1973. The judgment is delivered. And it is complicated. It's a 7-6 split on many points. There were 11 separate opinions written. It was a chaotic conclusion to a chaotic case.
But out of that chaos, a consensus emerged. A brilliant compromise, really. A synthesis of the two views we've been discussing.
First, they had to deal with Golak Nath.
They overruled it. This is really important. The court agreed with the evolutionary view, your view, that Parliament can amend fundamental rights.
So I win. Parliament can touch property rights. They can limit rights for the greater good. The government got what it wanted for its land reforms.
You win the battle, but the structuralist view wins the war.
The caveat.
The massive caveat. The court said, yes, you can amend the text. Yes, you can abridge fundamental rights. However, the power to amend is not the power to destroy. Parliament cannot alter the basic structure or essential features of the Constitution.
So you can trim the branches, you can prune the leaves, but you can't chop down the trunk of the tree.
Exactly. And this basic structure doctrine becomes the ultimate shield. It's the filter through which all future amendments must pass.
Did they give us a list? Did they tell us exactly what constitutes this basic structure?
They did not give an exhaustive list.
Right.
And that was deliberate. They wanted to keep it flexible. But the different judges, Sikri, Shalat, Grover, and others, gave illustrations in their various opinions.
Let's run through some of them to make this concrete for the listener.
Supremacy of the Constitution, that's number one. The Constitution is the supreme law, not Parliament.
Republican and Democratic form of government. You cannot, through an amendment, change India into a theocracy or a monarchy.
The secular character of the state. The state has no religion and must respect all religions equally.
Separation of powers. The legislature, executive, and judiciary have to stay in their own lanes. One can't just absorb the powers of another.
Federal character. You can't just abolish the states and turn India into a unitary state. It is a union of states.
And finally, the dignity of the individual.
That last one is so crucial. It connects everything right back to the preamble. The dignity of the individual is the foundation of the entire democratic setup.
Now, there's a technical point here the sources mention about the distinction between law and amendment. This is a bit of legal gymnastics, wasn't it?
It was, to clean up the mess from Sankari Prasad and Golak Nath. The court held that a constitutional amendment is not an ordinary law under Article 13.
So the article that says the state shall not make any law that takes away rights doesn't apply to amendments.
Correct, but, and this is the genius of it, the amendment is still subject to the inherent limitation of the basic structure. So Article 13 doesn't stop you, but the fundamental identity of the Constitution does.
It's a masterful move to save democracy from itself.
It really is. It allowed the government to carry out its land reforms because the right to property was held not to be part of the basic structure, but it prevented them from becoming a dictatorship. It gave them the tool to fix poverty, but took away the tool to destroy liberty.
Which brings us to Part 6, application. The tension between rights and directive principles. This was the spark that started the whole Fireland reform.
And we often view these two parts of the Constitution as enemies. Part 3, your individual rights, versus Part 4, the social goals.
The evolutionary view says Part 4 should override Part 3. If the goal is the common good, like ending the concentration of wealth, then individual rights can sometimes be selfish hurdles. Why should one person's right to own 1,000 acres stop the state from feeding 1,000 families?
That was the government's exact stance. They argued that concentration of wealth is a social evil, so the right to property must yield to the greater good.
And, to be fair, Case of Ananda did allow that specifically for property.
It did. But the structuralist view offers a more nuanced reading of the two parts. It argues that Part 3 and Part 4 are not contradictory, they're complementary. Together, they are the conscience of the Constitution.
Harmony.
Harmony. You cannot achieve social welfare by crushing individual dignity. You can't build a just society on the ruins of human rights. The judgment really emphasizes that the Constitution rests on the balance between these two.
It's like a bicycle. One wheel is rights, the other is duties and social goals. If you remove one, the whole thing falls over.
And there's a very specific and very important angle here regarding minority rights that the sources bring up.
Yes, the advisory committee debates from the framing of the Constitution.
The sources highlight that when the Constitution was being written, the minorities, Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Parsis, they gave up certain political claims, like separate electorates, in exchange for guaranteed cultural and educational rights.
It was a bargain.
A covenant. Exactly. The advisory committee debates prove these rights were meant to be non-negotiable safeguards. If Parliament could just vote them away with a simple majority, the covenant is broken. That strongly suggests that minority rights are part of that basic structure.
They are part of the identity of a secular India.
Precisely. If you remove them, you break the promise upon which the nation was founded.
So we've traveled all the way from the land reforms in Kerala to the philosophical heights of identity and structure.
It is a long and complex journey.
Let's try to wrap this up. What does this all mean for the listener today? Why does a case from 1973 still matter so much?
I'll make a bold statement. The basic structure doctrine is the primary reason India is still a functioning democracy today.
That's a very bold statement.
I think it's historically accurate. In the years following 1973, specifically during the emergency from 1975 to 77, there were direct attempts to radically alter the Constitution.
The 42nd Amendment.
The 42nd Amendment tried to rewrite the preamble, drastically reduce the power of the courts, and concentrate all power in the Prime Minister's office. There were even attempts to insert a clause saying that no amendment can be called in question in any court on any ground.
A total power grab. But the Kesavananda verdict stood in the way.
It stood like a wall. It established that Parliament is supreme in its sphere. It can make laws, it can amend the text, but the Constitution is sovereign. The basic structure is the shield that protects the identity of the nation from, well, from transient political majorities.
Just because you win an election today doesn't mean you own the country forever.
Precisely. You are a custodian, not an owner. You are a tenant in the house of democracy. You can renovate, but you cannot demolish.
I want to leave the listener with one final provocative thought. We talked about that icy uncertainty. The court never gave an exhaustive final list of what constitutes the basic structure. They deliberately left it open-ended.
And many critics, especially from the government side over the years, have called this a flaw. They say, how can we govern if we don't know the rules? It's undemocratic.
But maybe, just maybe, that uncertainty is the entire point. Maybe it's the genius of the decision.
Go on.
Well, if they had made a rigid written list in 1973, Parliament would have spent the next 50 years finding clever loopholes around it. They would have engineered laws that followed the letter of the list but completely violated its spirit.
Ah, I see.
By leaving it as a concept, identity, dignity, democracy, the court created a living, breathing defense system. As new threats to democracy emerge, the doctrine can expand to meet them.
It's the uncertainty of liberty. It forces the state to always think twice, to always ask, am I crossing the line? That hesitation, that is where freedom lives.
That hesitation is where freedom lives. I like that a lot.
The Indian Constitution has survived for over 75 years, while so many others in the post-colonial world have collapsed. And Kesavananda Bharati is a huge reason why. It ensured that the rule of law remained above the rule of men.
So the next time you pick up a copy of the Constitution, or even just read the preamble online, don't just read it as a text. Read it as the soul of your rights. Read it as the thing that stands between you and absolute power.
And remember, it's not just ink on paper, it's a structure. And it's holding the roof up over all of us.
Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Thank you.
We'll see you on the next Deep Dive.